You've noticed it, haven't you? The friends who used to call don't anymore. The invitations have stopped coming. The group chats have gone quiet. Maybe you've tried to fight it. You've reached out, sent messages that went unanswered, made plans that fell through, extended yourself only to be met with excuses or empty promises. And slowly, the truth has settled in. You're being isolated, not by your choice, but by some invisible force that seems to be pushing people away from you. And if you're honest, it feels personal. It feels like rejection. It feels like punishment. But what if I told you that the isolation you're experiencing isn't abandonment at all, but assignment? God is protecting you from contamination. The first reason God isolates you is the most uncomfortable one to hear. Some of the people you think you need are actually toxic to what God is building in you. They're not necessarily bad people. They might even be good people, but they're the wrong people for this season. And God, in His wisdom, is removing them from your life before their influence corrupts what He's trying to establish in you. Think about it. When a surgeon operates, they don't just clean the instruments, they create a sterile environment. They isolate the patient from every possible source of infection because they know that even one contaminant could compromise the entire procedure. That's what God is doing in your life right now. He's creating a sterile environment because He's performing surgery on your heart, your mind, your character, your calling. And He cannot allow contamination during the process. In Numbers 12, Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses. God immediately struck Miriam with leprosy and isolated her outside the camp for 7 days. Why? Because she was contaminating the leader God had chosen. Her criticism, her jealousy, her influence, it all had to be removed. Moses couldn't fulfill his calling while being constantly undermined by people who should have been supporting him. So God isolated Miriam to protect Moses' assignment. That's what's happening to you. The friends who constantly question your decisions, who mock your faith, who subtly discourage your dreams. God is removing them. The relationships that drain you more than they energize you, that pull you backwards instead of pushing you forward, that celebrate your failures more than your victories. God is ending them. Not because He's mean, but because He loves you too much to let their influence derail what He's prepared for you. You might be mourning the loss of these connections. You might feel guilty for the distance that's growing. But understand this, God isn't taking people away to leave you alone. He's clearing space to bring in the right people. He's removing the wrong voices so you can finally hear His voice clearly. He's isolating you from contamination so what He's planting in you can actually grow. Proverbs 13 verse 20 says, "Walk with the wise and become wise, for a companion of fools suffers harm." Sometimes isolation isn't about who you lost. It's about who you're being protected from losing yourself to. God would rather have you lonely for a season than influenced in a compromise for a lifetime. Your isolation is His protection. God is developing something that requires silence. There are some things God can only develop in you when the noise stops. Vision, clarity, discernment, identity, purpose. These things don't emerge in chaos. They don't crystallize in the middle of constant activity and endless socializing. They require silence. They require stillness. They require you to be alone with God long enough to hear what He's actually saying instead of what everyone else is saying. When God called Moses, where was he? In the wilderness, alone, tending sheep. For 40 years, Moses wasn't in the palace, surrounded by advisors and influencers. He was isolated in the desert, and it was there, in that lonely, forgotten place, that God appeared in a burning bush and revealed His assignment. If Moses had stayed in Egypt, surrounded by the noise and activity of Pharaoh's court, he never would have heard God's voice. The isolation was necessary. Elijah experienced the same thing. After his victory on Mount Carmel, he ran to a cave. And in that cave, alone and isolated, God taught him something profound. 1 Kings 19 verses 11 to 12 says that God wasn't in the earthquake, the wind, or the fire. He was in a gentle whisper. Elijah had to get away from the noise to hear that whisper. The isolation positioned him to hear what the crowd would have drowned out. That's what God is doing with you. He's giving you silence because He's about to give you something that requires it. a vision you couldn't receive in the middle of distractions, a clarity about your purpose that would be clouded by everyone else's opinions, a revelation of who you are in Him that can only come when you stop defining yourself by who others say you are. Your isolation isn't random. It's intentional. God is developing something in the silence that will echo in the noise. He's planting seeds in the quiet that will produce fruit in public. He's downloading instructions in your alone time that you'll execute in your assignment. But first, you have to be still. You have to be alone. You have to let the silence do its work. Psalm 46 verse 10 commands, "Be still and know that I am God." You can't be still when you're constantly surrounded. You can't know Him deeply when you're always performing for others. God is isolating you because the knowing He wants to give you requires the stillness you can only find alone. God is breaking your dependency on human validation. Here's a hard truth. You've been depending on people's approval more than you realize. Your sense of worth has been tied to how many friends you have, how often you're invited, how like you are, how validated you feel by others. And God is disrupting that dependency because He knows it will destroy you if He doesn't. As long as you need people's approval to feel good about yourself, you're enslaved. You'll compromise to keep them happy. You'll shrink to make them comfortable. You'll silence your truth to maintain their acceptance. You'll sacrifice your calling to preserve their applause. And God loves you too much to watch you do that. So He isolates you. He removes the validation sources. He makes the phone go quiet. He lets the invitations dry up, not to hurt you, but to force you to find your worth in Him alone. Because until your identity is rooted in what He says about you, you'll always be at the mercy of what they say about you. David understood this. Before he became king, he spent years isolated in caves, rejected by the very people he'd saved. In that isolation, he wrote Psalm 27 verse 10, "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." David learned that human acceptance is conditional, but God's acceptance is unconditional. He learned to find his worth in God's love rather than people's approval. And that lesson prepared him to lead a nation without being swayed by public opinion. Peter had to learn this too. After denying Jesus 3 times, he was isolated from the other disciples by his shame. But in that isolation, Jesus met him on the beach and restored him. John 21 records Jesus asking Peter 3 times, "Do you love me?" Not, "Do the other disciples approve of you?" Not, "Have you regained their trust?" But, "Do you love me?" Jesus was reestablishing Peter's identity around his relationship with God, not his reputation with people. Your isolation is doing the same thing. Every time you look for validation and don't find it, you're being forced to look to God instead. Every time you want affirmation from people and they're silent, you're learning to find affirmation in His Word. Every time you crave acceptance from others and it's withheld, you're discovering acceptance in His presence. God is breaking your addiction to human approval. It's painful, it's lonely, but it's necessary because the calling on your life is too important to be held hostage by people's opinions. The assignment God has for you requires a person who doesn't need the crowd's permission to obey heaven's instructions. And He's building that person in the isolation. God is preparing you for elevation that requires separation. Here's something most people don't understand. You can't stay connected to everyone and still fulfill your destiny. Promotion requires separation. Elevation demands isolation. Advancement necessitates leaving some people behind, not because you're better than them, but because you're called to something different. Abraham had to leave his family and his country to enter his promise. Genesis 12 verse 1 says, "The Lord had said to Abram, 'Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you.'" God didn't call Abraham's whole family. He called Abraham, and Abraham had to be willing to go alone. The blessing required separation. Joseph experienced this too. He was separated from his brothers, isolated in slavery, isolated in prison. And every level of isolation was actually a level of elevation. The pit led to Potiphar's house. The prison led to Pharaoh's palace. Each isolation was positioning him for the next promotion. And when he finally stood as second in command of Egypt, He understood why the separation had been necessary. His family couldn't have come with him through that journey. The elevation required him to walk alone for a season. That's what's happening to you. God is elevating you, and elevation always creates distance. The higher you go, the fewer people can go with you. Not because you're excluding them, but because they're not called to where you're going. They have their own paths, their own purposes, their own assignments. And God is removing them from your life, not to punish you, but to position you. You're not losing friends. You're losing access to people who were never meant to journey with you into your next season. You're not being rejected. You're being redirected. You're not being abandoned. You're being advanced. And the loneliness you feel right now is the space between who you were and who you're becoming. Jesus himself experienced this. As his ministry intensified, the crowds got bigger, but his inner circle got smaller. Eventually, even his closest disciples couldn't go where he was going. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he left 8 disciples behind, took 3 further, and then went alone to pray. Matthew 26 verse 39 says, "Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed." The highest level of his calling required the deepest level of isolation. If Jesus had to walk alone into his assignment, why would your experience be different? The isolation you're feeling is preparation for elevation you're not ready for yet. God is separating you from the familiar so he can introduce you to the extraordinary. And yes, it's lonely, but the loneliness is temporary. The elevation is permanent. God is teaching you that he's enough. The final reason God isolates you is the most important one. He wants to prove to you that he alone is sufficient. As long as you have people to lean on, you'll never fully lean on him. As long as you have human comfort, you'll never fully experience divine comfort. As long as you have earthly support systems, you'll never discover that he's the only support you actually need. God isn't trying to make you miserable. He's trying to make you whole. And wholeness doesn't come from having everything. It comes from realizing that having him means you have everything. But you'll never learn that lesson surrounded by people who buffer you from your need for God. Paul discovered this in prison. Acts 16 records him and Silas beaten, bleeding, feet locked in stocks, sitting in a dark cell at midnight. They had no friends there, no support system, no one to encourage them, just them and God. And what did? They sang worship songs. They praised God. And God responded with an earthquake that opened every prison door. Their isolation became the setting for a miracle, not because God needed them to be alone to perform it, but because they needed to be alone to fully appreciate that he was the one who did it. If they'd been surrounded by supporters, they might have credited human encouragement for their strength. But alone, they had to credit God. That's what your isolation is doing. It's removing every other source of strength so you discover that God's strength is more than sufficient. It's eliminating every other source of comfort so you experience that his comfort actually works. It's taking away every other source of provision so you witness that his provision never fails. Psalm 73 verses 25 to 26 says, "Whom have I in heaven but you? And earth has nothing I desire besides you. My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." You can't authentically say that when you're surrounded by people you desire. You can't mean it when you have a dozen other sources of strength. But when God is all you have, those words stop being poetry and start being reality. Your isolation is God's classroom where he's teaching you the most important lesson of your life, that he's enough, that his presence satisfies more than any friendship, that his love fulfills more than any relationship, that his approval validates more than any crowd's applause, that his companionship comforts more than any human connection. And once you learn that lesson, once you truly internalize that God alone is enough, you'll never be desperate for people again. You'll never feel incomplete without them. You'll never compromise yourself to keep them. You'll enter every future relationship from a place of wholeness rather than need, strength rather than weakness, security rather than desperation. If this message resonated with where you are, subscribe to this channel for more encouragement on faith and purpose. Your isolation isn't the end. It's the beginning of something greater than you can imagine. God bless you.